Hi, this is Nisha, and this is part 5 in our series, kind of taking a closer look at the history, and I don't know, just fun with AKs, to be honest. I would say it's the final part, but I learned with the FAL series when I said part 4 was the final one that you never know, so something will probably come up. This is the one I've got finally planned for now, and it's looking at the Russian AKS-74U, often called the Krinkov or Krink, although never in Russia. It's a pretty famous gun by today's standards, and so I brought out a few comparatively similar guns to do a little compare and contrast and just talk about the history. Now, the original AKS-74U was chambered for the 5.45x39 cartridge, and it was essentially a short carbine or even sub-carbine version of the AK-74, maybe today what we consider a PDW, but it wasn't really the first attempt to make a tiny AK. In Russia, there were prototypes before with short barrels, back when the 7.62x39 cartridge was common, but none of them went much of anywhere because of various reasons: overheating, terrible range, terrible accuracy, you know, just impracticability, too big of a muzzle flash. You get the idea. One of the first countries to put a compact AK into production was actually Hungary at the FEG factory. This is the AMD65. Now, this is a sporter version. Sorry, the stock is really stiff on this one. This is a sporter version that was sold by Tennessee Guns many years ago. It's an FEG receiver and matching kit built up. Now, I'm not sure if it was built in Hungary or the US. There's contradictory reports, so we'll just leave it there. But it is Hungarian. And the AMD65 was a compact carbine version of Hungary's then standard issue AKM63, which was a copy of the AKM, obviously. Initially designed for tank crews and other vehicles, and later carried over to airborne and other specialists. In the rear, the receiver is pretty well the same as any AKM. We do have this folding stock, as you saw. It's a pretty unique folding stock, and when it's folded, it's very flush in the back here. It's very stable. Rubber recoil pad. It even has a little tiny rubber bumper so it doesn't ding up the receiver too badly. The bolt's the same. The bolt carrier is the same. The gas piston is actually a little bit shorter because they shortened the gas system by about ½ an inch, maybe 3/4. So it's shorter than an AKM gas system, but not by a heck of a lot. Like the AKM63, we have an exposed upper handguard. Well, there's no handguard, exposed gas tube, I should say, instead of an upper handguard. We also have this grill style lower handguard with an attached pistol grip. Now, this one has the later style plastic grips. They're kind of a soft plastic, pretty durable, kind of a grayish green from what I know. The early ones had wood, although typically you see more wood on the AKM63 grips. Usually these would quickly go to the polymer just for the durability factor. Now, the biggest thing here is we took the 16¼ inch AKM barrel and we shortened it down to 12 inches. Here. Now, unlike with a lot of later guns, we're not doing a combination front sight gas block. These are two separate pieces. But as you see, they butt up right against each other. Now, the original gun would use, in fact, this is the original muzzle brake here. It was a large brake designed to help control recoil. But because this is a semi-auto carbine, there is this 2-inch extension installed between the brake and the barrel to bring the overall length out to 16 inches. Without it, would be a little over 14. About right here. So it was a short gun. This was an extremely light gun. In fact, it was the lightest AK until the AKS-74, the Krink, was adopted. And Hungary would would manufacture these FEGs specifically for a very long time, usually in smaller batches, but very consistently through the 70s and 80s, and these are still in use around the world today. And this is probably the best Hungarian receiver build that's out there. These were very reasonable and cheap when they were available. This is in 7.6239 because, of course, in the 60s when this came in, 5.45 did not exist yet. These were often issued with the short, so-called tanker 20-round mags to make it more compact and light. And again, with the stock folded, we do have a very compact weapon. So this was kind of a proof of concept about having a short, light Kalashnikov, and it actually worked. I mean, it definitely had some shortcomings. There's a reason they kept making the AKM63 and then later the AK-63 in Hungary, because still the AMD65 was a specialist weapon. So while Russia experimented with short guns in the 60s and early 70s, it didn't really go much of anywhere until they went to the 5.45 cartridge. Now, after they adopted, or about ready to adopt, I should say, the AK-74 and the AKS-74, which is in part 4. Around 1973, the Soviet government set out requirements and parameters for a carbine version. It needed to weigh 5 pounds or less. It needed to be under 29 inches with the stock deployed, and under 18 inches with the stock folded up. It still needed to fire the standard rifle cartridge and take the standard magazines. And it needed to be effective out to, a couple hundred meters, at least reasonable use. 1974, a year later, the AK-74 was officially adopted and put into service a short time later. As I said in video 4, you started to see them in the hands of Russian infantry and airborne in late 1977, early 1978, and they would soon be used over in Afghanistan. The Krink was a little bit later. First they would do the RPK-74, and then they would get around to doing the AKS-74, this gun here. Several designs were submitted, including yet another from Ishevsk, with a team ostensibly led by Kalashnikov, although by this point he was more of a supervisor. He was a general and retired, so yeah, he was there but not doing as much. There were other people on the team. They essentially just took the AKS-74 full-length rifle. Everything back here is the same, the full-length stock we looked at, the caliber, the magazine, the receiver, and they shortened it up. Now this would have ultimately won, and dates as to when this was selected are a little contradictory, but it was around 1977, 1978 this was officially adopted into Soviet service. And it seems like it went into production around 1979, give or take. The major differences. Now this is an Arsenal SLR-104UR, which is a semi-automatic carbine, built in Bulgaria to original AKS-74U specs, except to make it legal we have a 16-inch barrel. The original gun's barrel would end right here at the gas block. It would be 8 1/4 inches long. We would be firing the 5.45 by 39. Originally this would have the 1 and 7.8, give or take 7.6 twist rate. Later they would speed that up to around 1.71 and then finally around 1.68, 1.69. So they would go to a faster twist rate because of the shorter barrel over time. The 16-inch barrel, of course, is covered up by this fake suppressor. We have 24mm threading, just as on the AK-74, and I do actually have a 5.45 Bulgarian flash hider, but I couldn't find it. This is a Yugoslavian pattern one, a very close copy, but made for 7.62 by 39. Close enough for this work here, just to show you. This would be normally what it would be fitted with. This bell shape acts as a flash hider. This rear hollow portion acts as an expansion chamber, and it also builds up back pressure to ensure reliability. So it was a multi-use device, and worked pretty darn well. Unlike with the AMD65, we've combined the front sight gas block unit here. We've also changed the handguards. They're shorter, along with a much shorter gas system. The handguard is retained in a very different way, as is the lower. Our dust cover has a hinge here instead of a rear sight, because if you had a rear sight here, you'd have basically no sight radius. So they moved the rear sight to the rear and put it on the dust cover, and the hinge is there to keep the dust cover reasonably stable. We don't have a ladder adjustable, we just have a 2-position L flip notch, which is sufficient for the short range of a gun. And something that's often overlooked, we actually have a shorter cocking handle. It's actually quite stubby. If you compare it to a regular AK-74, it is quite a bit smaller, which is kind of interesting. This gun weighs just over 5 pounds. We're at about 5.5. So still about a pound lighter than an AKM and many of the AK-74s. Overall length is under 29 inches. We're at about 28 3/4. So it is a small, compact gun. AKS basically just stands for Automatic Kalashnikov Folding. 74 is obviously the caliber and year. And U stands for short, and short refers to the gas system essentially. You could say it's the barrel too, but the front end essentially. These would be designed, I know this is kind of thought of as a commando gun, and they were used by Spetsnaz and other specialist units. But originally it was designed as more of a PDW, more of kind of like what the M1 carbine was designed for, to be issued to vehicle drivers, truckers, perhaps tank people in tanks who needed a compact backup gun, and most notably in the early days of Afghanistan, helicopter pilots. This way, if the helicopter was shot down, they would have a defensible gun to use that fired a full caliber. It does not have the range or the accuracy of an AK-74, but it is much easier to transport. They have neat little drop bags, and I've got a few out there I'll show in a different video. Now, this gun was primarily produced in Russia. In fact, it was only produced at the Tula Arsenal in Russia. Izhevsk and Molat did not make Krinks. Bulgaria would eventually get a license to make these in the 80s and produce this one, of course, along with many others for full auto use. East Germany, starting around 1986-87, for a very brief time, would make a version called the MPI-S M74K, which really isn't a Krink, but it was sort of kind of like it. You know, we'll throw up a picture, you'll see. It's a compact gun in 5.45. And likewise, Radom in Poland would do a version based on the Tantal called the WZ-89 Onyx, which was basically a Krinkified Tantal. Now, Krink is not a word used in Russia. It's an American word, possibly via Afghanistan. But everyone knows what Krink means here, so we just kind of use it. It works. The real name, I've already said, this was also sometimes called the Stubby cigarette, the cigarette butt, or the bitch, or a few other names. This one, because it's a semi-auto, has a rail as standard. They would offer a version called the AKS74UN with a rail, but it was pretty uncommon in Russia. They would also do an integrally suppressed version that came with a suppressor as from the factory, ready to go, called the AKS74UB. And that's kind of what this barrel shroud is trying to look like. This is an Arsenal part. I've considered SBRing it. I think I've just about convinced myself to do it, but with imports I'm always loath to alter them. This is the original type sling. It's a little different. It actually has a double buckle here, so you can more or less quick detach it, which is neat. And the side folding stock is straight off the AKS-74. Now, in more recent years, Arsenal would do a polymer version of this handguard and would use the standard polymer buttstock you see. So they would update it a little bit. Russia would produce these, specifically Tula again, until the 90s. I've read one date of 1993 and one date of 1997 for them going out of production. Based on what I've seen, 93 seems closer to truth. While this was appreciated for its size and compactness and full caliber by its users, it was also prone to overheat. It had a faster cyclic rate thanks to the shorter gas system, whereas the standard AK-47 fired about 650 rounds per minute. This thing would get over 700, about 725, 730. So in full auto, it would quickly overheat. Even with the booster, it still had quite a bit of a muzzle flash, and it was definitely loud. So what happened in Russia after the fall of communism and after the Tula Arsenal stepped out, Izhmash in the 90s would introduce the AK-105, which is a carbine version closer to the AMD with a 12-inch barrel. There has not really been a true AK-105 imported. There have been some Arsenal 107 and 106 CRs, but they're not really true Russian spec AK-105s. Either way, my point is this gun, as it ended its service life in Russia, would be replaced by a more modern design with a little bit longer barrel, going from a little over 8 inches to a little over 12. So the AKS74U, I should say, was inspired by the Colt M16's little carbine brother, the XM177 in Vietnam. It had a 11.5 inch barrel. Now, as we know, when America started to adopt a carbine as standard issue, they would go to a 14.5 inch barrel. They discovered that compactness is great, but it has a sacrifice. So intermediate is really a better, compromise length. Russia did much the same with this weapon here. The 8.25 inch barrel was small and light, but it had too many detractions. So, as these would wear out and hit the end of their service life, they would be replaced by the AK-105 with its 12 or 12.5 inch, sources disagree, barrel. Also, the AK-105 would have a standard length gas system, which made interoperability of bolt parts much better, and longer barrel, better range, and better accuracy. So that's what happened there. These are mostly out of service in Russia today. I'm sure there's some hanging on, but it was a mixed bag. But in the US, it's been very popular, and for a long time people had to build these from kits because of not really any originals, especially in 545 coming in. But these 104 URs came in about 4 years ago and are really good semi-automatic representations of an AKS-74U, and they're even SBR ready, which is nice, and I'm considering it, as I said. That was really about it for Krink use. No one really besides Bulgaria made an exact copy. However, another one that's very well known today is the now Serbian, formerly Yugoslavian M92. So these have been coming in for some time and very popular. They come in as pistols, and you can either SBR them or you can convert it to a carbine, as I've done here. I do plan to SBR this one. I just wanted to make sure the stock conversion worked. This looks a lot like a Krink, but it's different in a lot of ways. You saw the flash hider from it. This one has an extension on from CNC Warrior at the moment. It uses a very similar combination front sight gas block. This does have a flip up night sight, which is a Zastava trait. Instead of an 8.25 inch barrel, we have a 10.5 inch barrel, so a little bit longer. Commensurate with that, we have longer handguards. It fires 7.62 by 39 instead of 5.45 because Serbia never went to the 5.45 caliber. They did make a version of this in 5.56 NATO called the M85. We have a hinge top cover, but the hinge is not spring loaded as on the Krink. We have a very similar rear sight though. This is built on the Zastava pattern 1.0 millimeter receiver, not the 1.5. So similar in receiver concept to the M70AB1, right down to this underfolding buttstock. Yugo pistol grip. Feeds from standard mags. So a lot of folks consider this a Krink, and for a budget it is, but it's a little bit longer. And the reason they went to the 10-inch barrel was to better facilitate the 7.62x39 cartridge. Really 10 inches is about the smallest you can go for this cartridge and still get any real performance out of it. So it has a shorter gas system, but it's not near as short as the one on the AKS74U here. Obviously the folding stocks are different. A lot of people when they SBR these, they just put on like an Ace side folder, but I wanted to do the original underfolding pattern stock. I like going original. The sling that they made for these is also very similar to a Krink. That's also a Yugo. It's kind of a hybrid. So not really a true AKS-U, but very, very close and still very neat and affordable. Now one that often also gets called a Krink is a version of this gun here. This is my Romanian Wasser 1063 KR. This is a carbine version of the Draco, which came in for a brief time. Draco's a pistol, this is a carbine. Now the Draco and the Wasser KR is based on the PM-90 short rifle. Now in other videos we discussed the PM-90 long rifle, which was basically an AKM with this wire style folding stock. The short version took the 16-inch barrel, and Cugir literally just takes a 16-inch barrel and cuts it down to 12.5 inches. And then installs this combination front sight gas block, which is unique to it. It also shortens the gas system just a hair. This thing is 1/3 of an inch shorter, maybe. It's a little bit shorter than standard, but not by a lot. We have a standard rear sight here, although it only goes out to, I believe, 500 meters. And we're on a standard Wasser receiver. Now this is kind of interesting. This is not a Krink. This is not an AKS-U because it's an intermediate length. This is how much is added to the barrel to get it out to 16. Normally this would have a flash rider that would end about right here. This is very analogous to the Russian AK-105, or in this case, since this is in 7.62x39, the AK-104, which is the Ishev's version in that caliber. Going to that intermediate compromise. We're still a very short, compact gun, but we're not compromising as much. Romania would also do a version of this in 5.45x39, and even one in 5.56 NATO, although they would never be imported into the USA as carbines, and as pistols only the 5.56 NATO. They would never import a 5.45 pistol. So the Draco is, as you can see, comparing it to this one, very far removed from a Krink. It's more of just an AKM with a shortened barrel. And I have the 20-round mag in it. This is a Hungarian mag. Romania also made a 20-round mag for use in these. And there's a few different patterns and styles as well. So those are what are often thought of as Krinks today. Thought we would just, if I have table space, do a quick disassembly. Just because it is an interesting process. See, that hinge is open. You have a standard spring carrier. You see how short the piston is. And because of the way it is, the dust cover is actually what holds on your upper handguard and gas tube unit. It just comes right off. There's a plunger here that when you push it down, you can see it comes out, and when it lifts up, it retracts in. As for the Yugoslavian version, it disassembles in a very similar fashion, but this is not spring-loaded, it's loose, and the pin that holds the handguard is in there with quite a bit of friction. You also really have to force it out with a punch or something. Standard recoil spring. And standard bolt group there. Set this aside. You see here, just comparing the two to get an idea of the difference in length. Here you go. As you can see, the M92 is quite a bit longer, but still short compared to a standard one. And the one inside the Draco, the washer over there, is still a little bit longer than this here, right here. Well, that's really about it. They're interesting guns that really has seen limited military use because it was a specialist type weapon, but it did see pretty extensive combat in the mountains of Afghanistan and is still sporadically used around the world today, although most have gone to a more intermediate 12-inch style barrel. So in the end, Hungary kind of had it right all along with the AMD65. So yeah, even though it was a specialist weapon and then not a whole lot were used and made by the militaries, it's pretty popular in the media today. Of course, Osama bin Laden is one of its biggest advertisers, as unfortunate as that is. Yeah, I just thought no AK series would be complete without a look at the AKS74U, the Krinkov. I thought about rolling it into the AK-74 video, but that didn't seem honest. And so we'd share all these other variants. If you have any questions or comments, we welcome them below. Really appreciate you tuning in. If you liked the video, please click like. If you haven't already subscribed and feel like doing so, we really appreciate that. Please tune in again next time for more hopefully interesting and unique videos. We'll catch you then.